These are probably the 4 most exciting VR headsets I have ever owned. The MetaQuest 3, Valve Index, the Pimax Crystal, and the Pimax Crystal Super. Actually, these are pretty heavy. But looking at these headsets made me realize something. Recently, I caught myself asking a strange question. Did I lose the magic in VR? That might sound like a strange question, especially coming from someone who runs a VR channel. But recently I realized something. When I put on a headset today, I experience VR very differently than I did years ago. Back then, it was simple. You put on the headset and suddenly you were somewhere else. Another world, another space, and that alone felt magical. But today, something else happens. When I use the Valve Index, I start thinking about tracking, how stable the lighthouse tracking is, how precise the controllers are. When I use the Crystal Super, I start looking at edge-to-edge clarity, at performance, at how my GPU handles the resolution. And when I use the Quest 3, I start thinking about encoding, hand tracking, compression. And at some point, I realized something. I don't just play games anymore. I play with the technology. And that actually made me curious about something. Just think about this for a moment. Where are you right now in your VR journey? Are you still in that first phase where everything just feels magical? Or are you already tweaking settings, optimizing performance, and analyzing the technology behind VR? Just keep that question in mind for a moment. Because if you spend time in VR communities or in Discord or Reddit, you see the same thing happening. People compare tracking systems, they discuss patch notes, they analyze rendering settings, and slowly you start to notice something. Probably many VR enthusiasts go through different phases. The first phase, perhaps, is the magic phase. Everything is new. You explore, you look around, and you constantly think, wow, this is incredible. And then comes the optimizer phase. You start tweaking things, graphics, settings, super sampling mods. You try to squeeze more out of the system. Better performance, sharper visuals. And then there is a third phase, something I would call the deep enthusiast phase. At this point, you understand the technology much better. You know how tracking works. You know how rendering pipelines work. You know how compression works. And once you understand these things, you start seeing them everywhere. It becomes almost impossible not to notice. Recently, a friend of mine came to visit. His name is Roland, and he brought something interesting with him. A VR flyer from 1993. And that alone already felt a bit surreal because VR suddenly didn't feel like something futuristic. It felt historical. Something people had already been dreaming about for decades. So Roland tried the Crystal Super, and afterwards I asked him a question. Do you still feel the magic in VR? And his answer was interesting. Because he didn't talk about resolution or tracking or performance, he talked about worlds. He said the magic appears when he finds himself in a beautiful environment. A landscape, a calm place, something immersive. For him, the magic was still there, just in a different place. And then we looked again at the flyer from 1993. One thing that really stood out was a system called Phantom. It was a haptic device, basically a robotic arm that you could hold with your hand. And when you moved it through virtual space, you could actually feel virtual objects. You could feel resistance, you could feel surfaces, you could feel something pushing back against your hand, even though nothing physical was really there. And what makes this even more fascinating is this. There was almost nothing to see. No detailed graphics, no realistic virtual world. Sometimes there wasn't even a real visual scene. The experience was almost completely about touch. You moved the device and suddenly your brain told you there's something there, even though your eyes couldn't really see it. And the technical detail behind it was incredible. The system calculated force feedback 1,000 times per second. 1,000 times. Every second. So the moment you touched something virtual, your hand instantly felt it. And if you imagine experiencing that for the first time in 1993, that must have felt absolutely magical. Not because the graphics were impressive, but because suddenly you could feel something that didn't physically exist. And that also made me think about something else. Maybe the next moment of magic in VR will not come from better graphics. Maybe it will come from new ways of interacting with virtual worlds. For example, movements. Right now, most of us move through VR with a joystick. But imagine standing on an omnidirectional treadmill, like in Ready Player One, for example. Actually walking through a virtual world, feeling your body move through space. That could suddenly make everything feel completely new again. Or think about haptics. Haptic vests that let you feel impacts or environment effects. Haptic gloves that allow you to actually feel objects in VR. The moment virtual interaction becomes something your whole body experiences, VR might suddenly feel magical again, in a completely different way. And maybe the magic in VR doesn't come from 5% more sharpness or a slightly wider field of view or small technical improvements. Maybe the magic appears when something feels fundamentally new, when the technology suddenly opens a door you didn't even know existed. Or maybe the magic appears when we allow ourselves to stop analyzing everything, just for a moment. Because I don't think I can go fully back to that first phase. Once you understand the technology, you see it. You notice the tracking, you notice the rendering, you notice the compression. And that knowledge stays. And honestly, that's not a bad thing. It just means the way we experience VR changes. So, maybe the real question is not, is there a way back? Maybe the better question is, where do we look for the magic now? And earlier in this video, I asked you something. Where do you see yourself in this journey? Are you still discovering VR worlds, or are you optimizing your system? Or are you already deep in the technology, analyzing, tracking, rendering, and performance? Tell me in the comments. I'm really curious where this community stands. I actually have the feeling many of you are somewhere between phase 2 and phase 3 perhaps, but maybe I'm wrong. Until then, I guess I'll keep exploring VR in my own way, not just playing games, but also playing with the technology. And maybe that's just another kind of magic. If you are someone who doesn't just want to use VR, but also wants to understand it, then you are definitely in the right place here. All right, that's it for today. See you in the next one. Tschüss.